Get back from that tape, Ranger, please. Jenna Alvarez's voice cracked against the pouring rain as the German Shepherd lunged toward the boarded doorway of the burned-out Fairmont, dragging her 3 steps forward on the slick sidewalk. He wasn't barking. He was whining, a soft, pleading sound she had never heard in 7 years of service. And somewhere beyond that yellow tape, something answered. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you never miss stories like this. The Fairmont Apartments had stood on Bridge Street in Millbrook, Pennsylvania for 81 years, and for most of them, it had been the cheapest roof in town, the kind of building where a single mother could keep her kid off the street on a waitress paycheck. Then on a Tuesday 2 months earlier, a grease pan on the 3rd floor had spat a single lick of flame onto a stack of dry mail, and by the time the trucks pulled up, the whole East Wing was going like a match head. 1 woman had died inside. 15 families had walked out with the clothes they were wearing. The city had come out the next morning with a stack of red condemned notices and a roll of yellow tape, and by the end of the week, the Fairmont was a shell no one was supposed to enter. Ranger had been there the day of the fire, nose down, tail out, moving through the smoke with the calm certainty that had made him the best search dog in Bradford County. He had cleared every room they could reach. When Jenna had finally called him back to the truck, he had sat by the curb, ears forward, staring at the top-floor window as if he were counting something no one else could see. He had not stopped counting since. Now, in the drenching rain of a September morning, he was pulling her back to the same doorway for the 4th time that week. Jenna was 34 years old, 5'4" in her boots, and the Shepherd outweighed her by 15 pounds when he set his mind on something. She braced her heel on the curb, wiped the water out of her eyes, and let him lead. He always led on the last block. She had learned a long time ago that pretending to be in charge only wasted both their time. Cap says, "Trust the dog," she muttered, half to Ranger, half to the empty street. Cap also says, "Log the visits and go home. I'm running out of pages, buddy." Ranger did not look back. He circled the rear entrance of the Fairmont the way he always did, 3 counterclockwise turns, and pressed his broad chest against the plywood over what had once been the delivery door. He held it there. He whined, a long, low, pleading sound, thin at the edges, and Jenna felt the hair on the back of her neck lift under her wet collar. In 7 years, she had heard Ranger alert on collapsed decks and flooded basements, and one very quiet closet in a farmhouse outside Erie that she still did not like to think about. He had never made that sound before. He was not alerting on a body. He was asking. She squatted down beside him, her knees popping, and put a hand on his soaking flank. His heart was going fast under her palm. "What is it, Ranger? What's in there?" She said it soft, the way she would talk to a scared kid. The dog turned his head and looked at her with those steady amber eyes and made the sound again. Then he went to the plywood and pressed his nose to the seam, and after a moment she could have sworn she heard something on the other side. A shuffle, a whisper of movement, like a small animal shifting on old paper. It was gone before she could be sure. She was on the radio before she stood all the way up. Captain Doug Harrington answered on the second click. Doug was 58 years old, 29 of them at the Millbrook Fire Company, and he had the kind of gravel voice that made new recruits sit up straight in their chairs. "Alvarez, tell me you are not at the Fairmont again." "I'm at the Fairmont, Cap." "Jenna, Doug, he's asking. He's not indicating a body, he is asking. I have never heard him do this. Something is alive in there, and he wants us to know." There was a long pause on the line. She heard him tap a pen against a desk. Doug had known Ranger since the dog was 10 weeks old and small enough to sleep in a rain boot. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted a quarter of a degree. "You want a wellness check on a condemned building based on a whine." "I want a wellness check on a condemned building based on Ranger." Another pause. Log the visit, come in, write it up clean. I'll call Chief Ortega and see what he'll wear. She could hear him already deciding it was not enough. Doug would go to bat for her, but the city had put more locks on the Fairmont than a bank vault, and Chief Ortega was terrified of a lawsuit if anyone got hurt inside. Nobody was going to break plywood off a condemned building because a dog was sad. She wrote it up clean anyway. She wrote it up so clean that when her direct supervisor, Deputy Chief Karen Lundgren, read it the next afternoon, Karen closed the folder, folded her hands on top of it, and said with all the kindness in the world, "Jenna, I want you to take a few days. You loved Mrs. Delaney. We all did. Sometimes the dog picks up on us, honey. Take a long weekend. Sleep in with your husband. Take Ranger to the lake. Come back Tuesday and we'll talk." Jenna sat very still in the chair across the desk. Mrs. Delaney was the woman who had died in the Fairmont fire. She had been 67 years old, a retired lunch lady from the elementary school, and she had baked Jenna a peach pie the Christmas before because Jenna had helped her carry groceries up the stairs one August afternoon when the elevator was out. Jenna had loved her. Jenna had also cried in her truck for 20 minutes the night of the fire, and Karen knew it because Karen had brought her a cup of coffee and sat with her. "Karen," Jenna said, "he's asking. He has never asked." "Take the weekend," Karen said. She said it the way people say things they have already decided. Jenna took the folder. She took her coat. She did not take the weekend. At 4:15 the next morning, she parked her Chevy across the street from the Fairmont with the lights off. She had a thermos of coffee, a pair of binoculars, and Ranger in the passenger seat with his nose fogging the window. The rain had thinned to a mist. The streetlights on Bridge Street were the old sodium kind, and they painted everything the color of a bruise. Nothing moved for a very long time. Then, at 20 minutes past 5, something moved. A slat of plywood on a basement window at the north corner of the building shifted, tilted outward, and a shape slipped out. It was a small shape, bird-thin, hooded, moving low and fast, the way frightened kids move when they have learned that being seen is dangerous. It carried a plastic bowl. Jenna's breath stopped in her throat. She watched the shape hurry 2 blocks down to the Sunoco on the corner of Bridge and Elm, kneel in the shadow of the ice cooler, and hold the bowl under the outdoor spigot the mechanics used to rinse windshields. The bowl filled. The shape stood, looked both ways with the practiced caution of a much older person, and hurried back. Slat of plywood tilted. Shape vanished. It was 5:26 in the morning, and Jenna Alvarez had gone entirely, completely cold. Not an animal, a child. Her hand was already on the radio. This time she called 911, because that was the fastest way to get a truck rolling without waking Karen. And she called Doug on her cell at the same time, and her voice was steadier than her fingers. "Doug, get out of bed. There is a kid in the Fairmont. I saw him. I saw him carry water in. Ranger has been telling us for 2 months. Get out of bed." To his eternal credit, Doug did not argue. He did not tell her she was tired. He said, "On my way, Alvarez. Do not go in without me." She sat in the truck with her hand shaking on the door handle for 9 of the longest minutes of her life, while Ranger pressed his forehead against her thigh and did not make a sound, as if he understood exactly what they were doing now, and he did not want to break it. The trucks came without sirens. Doug was in the first one, still in a Millbrook fire sweatshirt he had clearly slept in, his grey hair standing up on one side. 2 firefighters, Reyes and Cochran, followed with the crowbar and the Halligan. Doug looked at Jenna. Jenna looked at Ranger. Ranger looked at the plywood on the north corner basement window and let out one soft, urgent breath. "That one," Jenna said. Reyes worked the Halligan into the seam. The plywood squealed and gave. The window behind it was a black square that smelled of ash and wet blankets and faintly of peanut butter. "Ranger," Jenna said. "Find." He went in first. tail low, moving the way he always moved around frightened children, which was to say without any sound at all, his big paws finding the floor as gently as a man crossing a nursery. Jenna went after him with her flashlight. The basement had been a laundry room once. Broken washers sat in a row like a jury. Ranger threaded through them and went up the emergency stairs to the first floor, then padded down a hallway of blackened doors, then stopped at a door at the end that had the number 9 and 1 hand-drawn on it, in blue crayon, a child's number, the 2 loops of the 9 going the wrong direction. He looked back at her, waited. She opened the door. The room had once been the super's studio, and it still had a battery lantern on the floor, casting a wide, pale circle. In the middle of the circle was a nest of blankets, sleeping bags, a pillow with a race car on it. On the pillow, half sitting up, half braced to run, was a boy. He was 9 or 10 years old. He had huge dark eyes and hair that had not been cut in months. He was clutching a jar of peanut butter with both hands, like a weapon he did not know how to use. On the blanket beside him were 2 apples, a stack of library books, and a framed photograph of a woman with the same wide, dark eyes. Ranger walked into the circle of lantern light, sat down carefully 3 feet from the boy, and lowered his head. The boy said, in a voice that had not been used out loud in a long time, "You came back." He was not talking to Jenna. Jenna went down on one knee at the edge of the light, her hands loose at her sides, the way she had been trained. She did not move any closer. She did not say his name yet, because she did not know his name. She said, very quietly, "My name is Jenna. That's Ranger. He's been trying to bring us to you for a while now, hasn't he?" The boy did not answer. His eyes went from her to the door behind her and back to her. Ranger, without lifting his head, edged his broad skull forward until it was under the boy's small hand. The small hand hesitated. Then it closed on the fur behind the shepherd's ear, and the boy's shoulders dropped a full inch, and he began to cry without making any sound at all. "His name is Caleb Monroe," Doug said very softly from the doorway. He was holding a folded piece of paper. "I called dispatch. Missing persons, ran the address. His mother was Rachel Monroe, apartment 307. She was the one who—" "I know who she was," Jenna said. She did not take her eyes off the boy. "Caleb, honey, nobody's going to hurt you. You've been very brave. Can you tell me why you're here?" The boy looked at Ranger. Ranger's tail thumped once against the blanket. Caleb swallowed. Then he said, "My mum is here. She told me not to leave her." Jenna felt something break inside her chest, quiet and clean, like the first crack in a windshield. "Where did you come from, Caleb?" "Before here." "The shelter." The words came out in a whisper. "They put me in the shelter. A lady with a green jacket said I was going to a place far away where they don't let you keep your own name. I ran. I came back to Mom." He looked at Ranger again. "He was already here. He waited for me." Doug turned his face away for a moment. Jenna did not. "Caleb," she said, "we are going to take care of you. We are going to figure it out together. Can you come with me and Ranger? Can you carry your mum's picture?" He nodded. One small nod. He put the peanut butter down. He picked up the frame. He kept his other hand on the shepherd's neck and did not let go the entire walk out of the building, down the hallway, up the basement stairs, out of the plywood-lipped window, into the wet grey morning that smelled of leaves and diesel. When Reyes tried to lift him up out of the window, Caleb flinched so hard that Reyes stepped back with his hands raised. Ranger jumped up on the sill on his own, turned, and looked at the boy. Caleb followed the dog. They put him in the back of Doug's truck under a blanket. Ranger climbed in with him. Jenna drove. When they got to the station, the boy would not let go of Ranger's collar to go inside. Jenna carried him, and the dog walked pressed against her hip like a bookend, and they went in together. That was Thursday, September 19th. That is the day this story begins to turn. Because up to now, This was the story of a good dog and a lost boy. But there was a reason the boy had run from the shelter. There was a reason Rachel Monroe had died in a fire on a Tuesday afternoon in a building she had lived in for 11 years. And there was a reason the little green-jacketed woman had told a 9-year-old that if he did not behave, he would be sent somewhere he could not keep his own name. None of it was an accident. None of it. And Jenna Alvarez, who was not a detective, who was a canine handler at a small-town fire company, was about to find that out the hard way. They fed him first. Doug's wife, Marlene, came in from the house across the parking lot with scrambled eggs and toast and a glass of milk and a thermos of hot chocolate, and she sat on the floor across from Caleb without saying much of anything and just watched him eat. He ate carefully, one bite at a time, the way a kid eats who has taught himself to make food last. When he was done, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "Thank you, Mom," in a voice you could barely hear. Marlene said, "You are very welcome, honey. My name is Marlene. I make the eggs a little different from the shelter. My grandmother taught me. Do you like them?" He nodded. He said, "Yes, Mom. Can Ranger have the crusts?" Marlene said, "Ranger can have the crusts." He tore each crust off carefully and fed the shepherd from his palm, and Ranger took each piece as delicately as if it were a bird's egg. Doug watched from the doorway and said quietly to Jenna, "That dog has fed him." "What?" "That dog. Look at his hand. That is not the way a kid feeds a strange dog. That is the way a kid feeds a friend. Ranger has been in and out of that building somehow. He has been bringing him things." She stared. She thought about the number of times in the last 2 months Ranger had disappeared out of her yard through the loose board in the back fence she kept meaning to fix. She thought about the morning she had found her back door standing open. She thought about the missing granola bar from her jacket pocket last week that she had blamed on her husband. She thought about how Ranger had come home 2 Saturdays ago with a page from a coloring book stuck to his paw, and she had laughed and thrown it away. "Oh," she said. "Oh, Buddy. Oh, Ranger." The shepherd looked up at her from the floor. He did not deny a thing. Child Protective Services arrived at 11. The caseworker was a tall woman named Denise Whitfield, who wore sensible boots and a grey blazer and had a folder 1/2 inch thick already because the county had been looking for Caleb Monroe for 8 weeks and change. Denise sat down at the little station house table across from Caleb and said, "Hello, Caleb. I have a very important job today. My job is to make sure you are safe. Can you tell me what you need?" Caleb looked at Ranger, who was flat on the floor with his chin on the boy's shoe. He looked at Jenna, who was standing behind Denise. He said, "I need to not go back." "Not go back where?" "To the shelter. The lady with the green jacket." Denise's face did a small, careful thing that Jenna would think about a lot later. She said, "Caleb, do you remember her name?" She said her name was Miss Patty. Denise wrote it down. She said, "And what did Miss Patty say to you?" She said, "If I cried, she would send me to a place in Ohio where they change your name and you never see your mom's picture again. She said my mom didn't want me anyway, or she would have made a will. She said the state was going to give me to somebody else and I should be grateful." He said it flat. He said it like a lesson he had memorized. "That's when I ran. I ran to my mom." Denise wrote for a long time. When she looked up, her mouth had gone tight in a way that Jenna recognized as anger being held under lock and key. Denise said, "Caleb, thank you for telling me. I need you to know something very important. What Miss Patty said is not true. Nobody is going to change your name. Nobody is going to take your mum's picture. I promise you that with everything I have. Do you believe me?" Caleb did not answer. He put his hand on Ranger's head. Ranger's tail thumped once, twice, 3 times against the tile. Caleb said, "Ranger says you're okay." Denise smiled, and there were tears in her eyes when she did it. She said, "Then I will not let Ranger down." She stepped out into the hallway with Jenna. She closed the door softly behind her. She said, "There is no Patty at the county shelter. I have worked with every intake person in Bradford County for 11 years. There is no Patty." Jenna felt the floor shift a quarter of an inch under her feet. Then who told him that? "That is the question," Denise said. "That is very much the question." Doug had been listening from the desk. He said, "Alvarez, before you get any ideas, this is not your case." Jenna said, "Doug." Doug said, "It is not your case. You are a canine handler. You did what a canine handler does. You found him. Denise will handle it. Go home, sleep, bring Ranger back Monday morning." Jenna looked at Caleb through the glass. He was sitting up on the folding chair with his mother's photograph in his lap. Ranger was leaning against his knees. The boy looked like he weighed 60 pounds soaking wet. He looked like he had been sleeping in a burned building for 2 months on peanut butter and apples because a woman he did not know had told him lies about his own dead mother. "Doug," Jenna said, "it is my case. Ranger made it my case." Doug looked at her for a long time. Then he sighed, the way a man sighs who has been married for 31 years and has learned that arguing with certain kinds of stubborn is a way of wasting an afternoon. He said, "Marcus is going to kill me." "Marcus can get in line," Jenna said. Marcus Alvarez was Jenna's husband. He was 36 years old, a middle school shop teacher, and the kindest man in Bradford County. And when Jenna called him from the station at 12:40 and said, "Honey, we have a boy," he did not ask a single question except, "For how long?" She said, "I don't know yet." He said, "Okay, I'm on my way to the store." What does a 9-year-old eat that isn't peanut butter? She started crying so hard she had to hand the phone to Marlene. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Denise Whitfield had gotten emergency approval for Caleb to go home with Jenna as a short-term kinship-style placement because Jenna was the person who had found him and because the boy would not leave Ranger's side. And Denise was the kind of caseworker who knew when to bend the rules for the sake of a child. The paperwork was thick. Jenna signed all of it. She would sign it again and again and again in the months to come. Marcus met them at the front door with a bag of groceries and a face like a man trying not to weep. He crouched down to Caleb's eye level, held out a hand, and said, "Hey there, buddy, I'm Marcus. I hear you're friends with our dog." Caleb studied him. Caleb said, "He's not just your dog." Marcus swallowed. He said, "You're right. He isn't. Come on in. There's soup." That night, Caleb slept in the little back bedroom that Jenna and Marcus had painted pale blue 3 years earlier for a baby that had not come. He slept in a real bed for the first time in 2 months. Ranger slept on the rug beside him. Jenna sat outside the door for 2 hours because she could not quite believe any of it was real. The next morning began the second act of the story, and that is when the shadow that had been standing behind everything took its first real step forward. His name was Kyle Monroe. He was 39 years old. He was Rachel Monroe's stepbrother from a marriage her mother had made and unmade back in the 90s, which meant, technically, he was Caleb's step-uncle. He lived 2 hours south in a rented room in Altoona, and he had not spoken to Rachel in 9 years. He had a criminal record for check fraud that was 11 years old and cleaned up on paper. He had a very expensive lawyer named Randall Beck, who nobody in Millbrook could figure out how he was paying for. And on the Monday morning after Caleb was found, Kyle Monroe walked into the Bradford County Children and Youth Office wearing a pressed shirt and khakis and asked to take custody of his nephew. Denise Whitfield called Jenna at 11:15 that morning. "Jenna, we have a situation." Kyle knew things. That was the frightening part. He knew Rachel had never named a guardian in a will. He knew the state defaulted to blood family before non-relatives. He knew Rachel had a small life insurance policy through her waitressing job at the Bridge Street Diner, $120,000, that was held for Caleb until he turned 18, unless a legal guardian was appointed, in which case the guardian could apply to the court to access it for Caleb's living expenses. He knew all of it. He also knew, or pretended to know, absolutely nothing about a woman named Miss Patty in a green jacket telling his nephew to run. "He wants him," Denise said over the phone. Her voice was flat. "He is standing in my waiting room right now. He brought a photograph of himself with Rachel as a teenager, which, by the way, is a real photograph. He is her stepbrother, he is family, and he wants him." Jenna, in her kitchen, sat down on the linoleum. Ranger walked over and put his head in her lap. Upstairs, she could hear Marcus reading to Caleb, some book about a boy and a robot. She could hear Caleb laugh, very small, for the first time since they had brought him home. "Denise," she said, "you cannot give him that boy." "I'm not giving him anything. I'm telling you what I have on my hands. He has retained an attorney. He is filing for emergency custody. I have to schedule a preliminary hearing within 10 days. Family court judge, most likely Judge Nora Whitaker. In the meantime, we hold placement where it is safest, and I will fight to keep that here. But Jenna, I have to be honest. Blood is heavy in these hearings. If he is clean, if he has a job, if he has an address, if there is no proof he means the child harm, he starts with the wind at his back. Do you understand?" "I understand," Jenna said, and she did, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. She hung up. She sat on the floor for 1 full minute with Ranger's head in her lap. Then she stood up and went to the drawer where Marcus kept the yellow legal pads and the mechanical pencils he liked. And she took a pad and a pencil, and she sat down at the kitchen table, and she wrote across the top of the page in block letters, "Miss Patty." And underneath it she wrote, "Who else knew about the insurance?" Because a step-uncle who had not spoken to Rachel in 9 years did not just happen to know about a policy from a diner waitress job. Somebody had told him. Somebody had told a 9-year-old boy to run from the shelter so the boy would be alone and easier to claim. And somewhere in Millbrook, if she could just find her, there was a woman in a green jacket who was the connective tissue between those two facts. Jenna underlined the words. She underlined them again. Ranger sat down at her feet and put his chin on her boot and looked up at her, and there was something so patient and so ready in his face that she almost laughed. "Okay, buddy," she said. "Okay, let's go find her." She started with the shelter. She went in the back way, and she did not identify herself as a fire company employee because she was, technically, on personal leave. She talked to the intake supervisor, who confirmed there had never been a Patty on staff. She asked to see the sign-in log for the 2 days Caleb had spent there before he ran. The supervisor, whose name was Marcia Boone, and who had been at the shelter for 22 years, pulled the log with a face that said she was not supposed to be doing this and did not care. There were no volunteers logged in during those 2 days who matched the description. No green jacket, no woman named Patty, nobody who had reason to be alone with a scared 9-year-old boy from a burned-out building. But there was a name on the visitor log for the 2nd day. A social work student, doing an observation for a college class, signed in at 2:15 in the afternoon and out at 4:40. The name was Patricia Beck. Under affiliation, she had written in loopy handwriting, Community College of Bradford, Patricia Beck. Jenna stood at the counter looking at the log with her heart doing a slow, cold thing inside her chest. She said very carefully, "Marcia, can I ask you one more thing? Do you know if Patricia Beck is related to a lawyer in town named Randall Beck?" Marcia looked at her over the tops of her reading glasses. Marcia said, "Honey, everybody in Millbrook knows Randall Beck is Patty Beck's older brother. She works at his office part-time." Jenna drove home with the wipers going too fast against a clear windshield. Ranger sat in the passenger seat with his ears up as if he could hear her thinking. At home, she called Denise. She told her everything. Denise was quiet for a long time. Then Denise said, "That is not evidence, Jenna. That is a coincidence and a hallway rumor. A judge will not touch it." "It is not a coincidence. I know it's not a coincidence. I said a judge will not touch it. There is a difference. You need proof. You need a photograph. You need a witness. You need Caleb to identify her. And Caleb is 9 years old and traumatized. And if we put him on a stand and Randall Beck comes at him, he will fall apart. And Beck will make it look like we coached him. Then what do we do? You keep him safe. I file. We wait for the hearing. I'm going to talk to some people, and Jenna, listen to me very carefully. Do not go near Randall Beck's office. Do not go near Patricia Beck. Do not confront her. If you do, you hand Kyle Monroe the case." Jenna promised. She meant it when she said it. She would not keep the promise. That night at dinner, Caleb ate 2 whole bowls of Marcus's chicken and rice. He asked very carefully if he could have another glass of milk. He said, "Please," and "thank you," like a kid who was terrified of being sent back for having asked. When Marcus said yes and poured the milk without making a big deal of it, Caleb's eyes got wet, and he wiped them fast on the back of his sleeve. Ranger, under the table, put a paw on his foot. After dinner, Jenna took Caleb out to the backyard. It was cool and clear, and the leaves on the maple were just beginning to turn. She sat down on the step and patted the wood next to her. He sat. Ranger flopped between their knees. "Caleb," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to know it is okay if you don't want to answer. Is that okay?" He nodded. "When you were at the shelter and the lady in the green jacket talked to you, was there anybody else there? Did she say a name? Did she talk about anyone else?" He was quiet for a long moment. He rubbed his thumb over Ranger's ear, the way you rub a smooth stone. "She said," he said very softly, "that my uncle was coming for me. She said if I ran away and hid, then my uncle could find me and take me home. But if I stayed at the shelter, they would send me to Ohio first, and then he would never find me. She said Ranger was going to help. She said Ranger was a rescue dog, and he would come find me and take me to somewhere safe." Jenna could not breathe for a second. She said Ranger by name? She said the German Shepherd from the fire. She said he loved my mom. She said he was going to help me get home to my uncle, but she got it wrong." Caleb looked up at her, and his face was so serious it did not look like a child's face at all. "Ranger didn't take me to my uncle. Ranger took me to you." Jenna put her arms around him very slowly so he could pull away if he needed to. He did not pull away. He put his head against her shoulder. Ranger, without being asked, leaned his weight into both of them. "Ranger took you exactly where you needed to go," she said. "Ranger is a very good dog, and nobody is going to take you back." She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with her yellow legal pad, and she wrote a timeline. Fire on July 15th. Rachel Monroe dies. Caleb goes to the shelter July 16th. Patricia Beck signs in as a social work student on July 17th. Caleb runs the night of July 17th. Ranger begins returning to the Fairmont on July 18th. Ranger comes home with peanut butter on his muzzle on July 22nd. Kyle Monroe files for emergency custody on September 22nd, 3 days after Caleb is found. Patricia Beck is Randall Beck's little sister. Randall Beck represents Kyle Monroe. She underlined the last 3 lines. Then she wrote a new line at the bottom. Who gave Patty Beck the fire? Because none of this made sense unless Kyle Monroe had known about the fire before the fire happened. And nobody had known about the fire before it happened, unless the fire had not been an accident. The fire investigator's name was Warren Delcambry, and he was 71 years old and semi-retired and did most of his work out of a converted feed store in Towanda. Doug knew him. Doug called him on Tuesday morning at 8, and Warren answered on the first ring the way old men answer phones. and by 9:30, Jenna was sitting across a desk from him with Ranger on the floor beside her chair. She told him everything. She left nothing out. Warren listened with his fingers laced across his stomach and did not interrupt once. When she was done, he said, "The Fairmont fire was ruled accidental. Grease pan on a hot burner. Rachel Monroe was napping on the couch. She never woke up. Smoke got her before the flame did. I know what it was ruled. You want me to reopen it? I want you to look at it again." Warren nodded slowly. He said, "Alvarez, I am going to tell you something that I have not written down anywhere. When I did that walkthrough, I found something that bothered me, and I signed off on the accident finding anyway because I could not prove otherwise, and because the family wanted to bury her and stop paying storage on a body. I found a rag in the trash under the sink in 307. Cotton. Smelled faintly of paint thinner. Not enough to say anything for sure. Could have been from 100 things, but I remember it. It bothered me. I put it in a bag. I still have the bag." Jenna's mouth went dry. Warren said, "You get me somebody willing to open a case, and I will take the bag to the lab. I am not going to open it on my own hook. I am 71. I am too old to take on the county on a hunch. But if a caseworker files and asks, or if a family court judge orders it, I will hand over the bag and I will testify to what I saw." She thanked him. She stood up. She was almost at the door when Warren said, "Alvarez." She turned. He said, "I remember the boy. I saw him at the shelter the day after. Little skinny kid in a Steelers hoodie. I was there dropping off a report. He was sitting in a chair in the hallway all by himself. There was a woman in a green windbreaker crouched down in front of him. I remember because I thought at the time, that is not how you talk to a scared kid." She had a finger up in his face. She was saying something quiet and hard. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the floor. I walked past and she stopped. I have thought about that 100 times since I heard he had run. If I could pick her out of a lineup, I would. Jenna went very still. She said, "Warren, would you swear to that?" "I would swear to it in a church." She drove home very carefully because her hands were not quite hers. That evening, while Marcus was at the school for parent-teacher conferences, the doorbell rang. Jenna checked the window before she opened it, because that was the kind of person she was now. On the front step stood a man she had never seen before. He was in his late 30s, clean-shaven, wearing a Millbrook Millers baseball cap and a windbreaker with the collar zipped up against the evening chill. He was holding a small bouquet of grocery store carnations. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said, and his voice was very pleasant. "I'm so sorry to just show up. My name is Kyle Monroe. I'm Caleb's uncle. I know this is not how any of this is supposed to go, and I promise I will not step past this door. I just wanted to say thank you for finding him, for keeping him safe, and I wanted to leave these for him." Jenna's hand tightened on the door. Ranger behind her was on his feet and silent, ears forward, weight low. The dog did not make a sound. He did not have to. She said, "Mr. Monroe, you should not be here. You need to talk to your attorney about talking to Denise Whitfield about visitation." I know. I just wanted him to see." He held up the flowers. His face was doing a very good job of looking like a face that wanted to cry. "Can I just see him for 30 seconds, just so he knows he has a family?" Jenna said, in a voice so calm it surprised her. "Mr. Monroe, he has a family. Please leave." He blinked. The face did another very small thing that she saw. It was a flicker. It was a man realizing that a small woman in her doorway had just told him no. Then the flicker went away and the polite face came back. "Of course," he said. "I understand. Please tell him his Uncle Kyle came by. Please tell him I am fighting for him." He set the flowers on the doormat. He walked to the curb. He got into a dark blue sedan and drove away, and as the car passed under the streetlight, Jenna saw that there was another person in the passenger seat. A woman. She could not see her face. She could see, in the split second of light, the collar of a green windbreaker. Jenna shut the door. She locked it. She leaned against it and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. Ranger came and pressed his flank against her hip and did not move. "Okay," she said to the ceiling. "Okay." Denise's number was already on the screen. She called it. She said, "Denise, he was on my porch. She was in the car. He is doing this in front of Ranger. He's doing this in front of my dog. Denise, he doesn't know what dogs remember." Denise, on the other end, said very slowly, "Jenna, did he threaten you?" "No." "Did he cross the threshold?" "No." "Did anyone else see him?" "There is a doorbell camera. Marcus put it up 2 weeks ago because a package got stolen. It has audio." Denise was silent for a second. Then she said, "Send me the file, right now. Do not touch it. Do not edit it. Just send me the raw file. You may have just handed me the hearing." Jenna sent the file. She sat on the kitchen floor with Ranger for a long time after. When Marcus got home, she told him everything. Marcus listened. Then he went to the front closet and got out the aluminum baseball bat he had used for one summer of City League in 1999 and set it beside the front door with no comment at all. He said, "The bat stays. Ranger sleeps in the boys' room. We keep the porch light on. Nobody comes to this door I don't know." She said, "Marcus." He said, "I love you. Come to bed." The preliminary hearing was set for the following Wednesday. In the meantime, 3 things happened that changed the whole shape of the case, and none of them were things Jenna Alvarez had planned. The first thing was that Warren Del Cambra, on his own initiative, drove the bagged rag to the state lab in Harrisburg on Thursday morning and paid for the analysis out of his own pocket. On Friday afternoon, he called Jenna at home, and his voice was as calm as a man reading the weather. He said, "Alvarez, the rag has traces of a hydrocarbon accelerant, not paint thinner, charcoal starter, common kind, sold in every hardware store in the Tri-County. Someone poured it on the burner and left the rag under the sink. That fire was not an accident." Jenna sat down on the top of the stairs and pressed her hand over her mouth. "Warren, I called Denise Whitfield. I called Doug Harrington. I called the state fire marshal. It is out of my hands now. It is out of my hands and into the states, and where it should have been from day one, and where I should have put it." "Warren, don't." "I put it there now. It is where it should be now. That is what matters." She thanked him. She hung up. She went and stood in the doorway of the little back bedroom where Caleb was building a Lego set on the floor, with Ranger flopped beside him like a large fur pillow, and she watched them for a long minute, and she did not say a word. The second thing was that Marlene Harrington, who had raised 3 boys and buried a husband once already before Doug and knew how to work a phone, called every diner in Millbrook and Towanda and Sayre asking about a woman named Patricia Beck. She did not identify herself. She said she was looking for a lost cousin. On Saturday morning, she called Jenna and said, "Honey, the waitresses at the Bridge Street Diner say Patty Beck was in there with a man about a month before the fire. She was asking about Rachel Monroe. She said she was doing a report for a college class on single mothers in the community, and could anybody tell her about Rachel's schedule and her life insurance benefits. The waitresses thought it was weird. One of them, a girl named Steph, told her to go pound sand. Another one told her Rachel worked the 6 to 2 shift Monday through Friday and that she had a policy through the diner because they had all just done open enrollment. Honey. She was asking a month before the fire. Jenna in her kitchen closed her eyes. Marlene, you are a miracle. I am a woman with a phone and a memory. You get that boy safe. That is all I care about. The third thing was that on Monday morning, 2 days before the hearing, Caleb Monroe walked into the kitchen while Jenna was making pancakes and stood very quietly beside her at the stove and said, "Miss Jenna, Ranger and I have something we need to tell you." She turned off the burner. She sat down at the table. She patted the chair beside her. Caleb climbed up. Ranger sat down between his knees and leaned his head on the boy's thigh. Caleb said, "Ranger knew my mum." Jenna waited. She used to give him bacon at the diner, the one where she worked. He came in one time with a policeman, and my mum snuck him a piece of bacon, and after that, whenever the policeman came in, Ranger would put his nose over the counter, and my mum would give him a piece. She told me. She said there was a dog with the fire people that had the softest ears, and if I ever got lost, I should find that dog, she said. His face crumpled. He did not cry. He fought it. She said if I ever got scared and she wasn't there, that dog would take care of me. She promised. And she was right, Miss Jenna. She was right. Jenna could not speak. She reached out and put her hand on his back. He leaned into her. He said, "I need you to know that. So you know Ranger is not just a work dog. He is my mom's dog too. He is a promise." Jenna sat with her hand on his back for a long time. Ranger looked up at her from the floor with those steady amber eyes, and it seemed to her in that moment that the shepherd had known all along and had been waiting only for the small human he loved to grow big enough to explain it. Wednesday morning came. Family Court, third-floor courtroom of the Bradford County Courthouse, Judge Nora Whitaker presiding. Judge Whitaker was 63 years old, a former public defender, and she had a reputation for being kind to children and cold to anyone who wasted her time. Denise Whitfield was there in a navy suit with a stack of folders. Warren Del Cambre was there in a grey blazer that was probably older than Jenna. Marlene Harrington was there in her Sunday shoes. Doug was there in his dress uniform. Marcus was there, holding Jenna's hand under the table so tight she could feel her wedding ring digging into her finger. Caleb was in a private waiting room down the hall with a court-appointed advocate and ranger, because Judge Whitaker had approved the shepherd as an emotional support animal for the hearing over the loud and repeated objections of Randall Beck. Kyle Monroe sat at the opposing table in a grey suit. He looked calm. He looked like a man who thought he was going to win. Beside him, on the bench behind the bar, sat his sister. Denise had confirmed by then that Patricia Beck was not just Randall's sister, but also, technically, Kyle's live-in girlfriend of the last 3 years. A piece of information Kyle had left out of his intake paperwork, and which, Judge Whitaker would note, was a very interesting omission indeed. Patty Beck was not wearing the green windbreaker today. Today, she was in beige, but her face, Jenna would think later, was a face that could not quite decide how it wanted to be seen. The hearing began at 10 sharp. Randall Beck opened first. He was smooth. He was polished. He walked the judge through Kyle's employment history, his rented room in Altoona, his stated willingness to move to Millbrook to be closer to family, his blood relationship to the deceased, his desire to keep the boy connected to his heritage. He never once looked at Jenna or Denise. He treated them like furniture. Then Denise Whitfield stood up. Denise said, "Your Honor, I have 3 witnesses and a video I would like to enter into the record." Randall Beck said, "Objection. This is a custody hearing, not a criminal trial." Judge Whitaker looked at him over her glasses. Judge Whitaker said, "Mr. Beck, I decide what this is. Sit down." He sat down. Warren Del Cambre went first. He walked the judge through the fire investigation. He walked her through the rag. He walked her through the lab results. He said calmly that in his professional opinion of 41 years, the Fairmont fire had been deliberately set. The courtroom was very quiet. Randall Beck did not object. Marlene Harrington went second. She testified about the phone call she had made to the diner staff. She testified about Patty Beck asking about Rachel Monroe's schedule and life insurance a month before the fire. Randall Beck asked her if she was certified as a private investigator. Marlene said no, but her sister-in-law had been a librarian for 38 years, and she had learned how to look things up. Judge Whitaker's mouth twitched at the corner in a way that Jenna would think of afterward as very close to a smile. Denise went third. Denise entered the doorbell camera video into evidence. The courtroom watched it in silence. On the small screen, Kyle Monroe stood on Jenna Alvarez's porch and asked for a look at the boy. The camera picked up, at the very edge of the frame, the profile of a woman in a green windbreaker in the passenger seat of a dark blue sedan. Randall Beck said, "Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence about the identity of the person in the vehicle." Denise said, "Your Honor, I would like to call Warren Del Cambre back to the stand." Warren went back up. Denise said, "Mr. Del Cambre, do you recognize anyone in this courtroom as the woman you saw speaking to Caleb Monroe at the shelter on the afternoon of July 17th? Warren looked at Patty Beck. Warren said, "Yes, ma'am, that is her. She was wearing a green windbreaker that day. I would swear to it in a church." Judge Whitaker looked at Patty Beck. Patty Beck looked at her lap. Randall Beck looked at his notes. Then Denise said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to bring in Caleb Monroe for a very brief statement in the presence of his support animal. He has been prepared for this. His court-appointed advocate is present. I would like the record to reflect that he asked to speak. We did not ask him." Judge Whitaker nodded. Ranger came in first. 94 pounds of German Shepherd, no leash, no harness, moving quietly, tail low, ears forward. He walked up the aisle and past the bar and stopped at the witness box and turned and waited, and Caleb Monroe came in behind him, carrying his mother's framed photograph in both hands. He was wearing khaki pants and a button-up shirt that Marlene had bought him at Kohl's on Saturday. He looked very small. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. She said very kindly, "Hello, Caleb. My name is Judge Whitaker. You do not have to say anything you do not want to say. We are here to help you. What would you like to tell me?" Caleb looked at Ranger. Ranger sat down beside him. Caleb put one hand on the shepherd's head and looked up at the judge, and his voice was quiet, but it did not shake at all. He said, "The lady in the beige shirt is the lady who was in the green jacket. She told me to run away from the shelter so my uncle could find me. She said my mom didn't love me because she didn't make a will. She said Ranger would come and take me to my uncle, but Ranger didn't. Ranger took me to Miss Jenna. I want to stay with Miss Jenna and Mr. Marcus and Ranger, that is all." He walked back down the aisle with the shepherd beside him. He did not look at Kyle Monroe. He did not look at Patty Beck. He looked at Marcus. Marcus opened his arms. Caleb climbed into his lap and put his face against Marcus's shoulder and did not cry, but his whole small body was shaking. Ranger lay down across both their feet. The courtroom was, for a long moment, completely silent. Judge Whitaker took off her glasses. She cleaned them very carefully on the sleeve of her robe. She put them back on. She said, "Mr. Beck, your client's petition for emergency custody is denied. I am ordering the child to remain in the current foster placement pending further review. I am also referring this matter to the state police in light of Mr. Del Cambre's testimony and the evidence presented today. I would suggest you consider retaining separate counsel from your sister at this time. This court is adjourned." Kyle Monroe stood up. He looked for the first time like a man who had not planned for this. His face went through several small expressions in a row, and none of them were the polite face Jenna had seen on her porch. Patty Beck beside him stood up too, and her mouth opened, and she looked at Kyle, and Kyle looked at her, and something passed between them that Jenna would remember later as the exact moment two people stopped being on the same team. They were arrested 3 days later. Not together, Kyle first, in a parking lot in Altoona, on a charge of conspiracy to commit arson and insurance fraud. Patty a day after at her brother's law office on charges of conspiracy and endangering the welfare of a child. Randall Beck was disbarred within 6 months, not for the child endangerment case, but for a small mountain of billing irregularities the state bar found when it went looking. The story that came out at trial was uglier than Jenna had guessed and simpler than Rachel Monroe deserved. Kyle had been in financial trouble for years. He had learned from a mutual acquaintance at a bar in Sayre that his estranged stepsister had a life insurance policy through her diner job, with a minor child as beneficiary. He had gone home. He had done the math. He had involved Patty, who had gotten close to the shelter by pretending to be a college student, and together they had planned the fire and planned the aftermath. They had underestimated exactly one thing. They had underestimated a German shepherd who remembered a piece of bacon and a promise. The state took its time with the criminal case, and the state was thorough, and by the following July, when the trees on Bridge Street were full and the days were long, Kyle Monroe was serving 22 years and Patricia Beck was serving 14. And Rachel Monroe's life insurance benefit had been legally protected in a trust for Caleb, administered by Denise Whitfield's office, to be released for his college education and adult expenses. Caleb Monroe stayed with the Alvarez family. There were bumps. There were nights he woke up screaming with the smell of smoke in his nose, and Ranger sleeping on the foot of his bed with one paw on his ankle. There was a therapist named Miss Rodriguez who came to the house on Thursdays and taught him breathing exercises he practiced with the dog. There was a first day of 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary where Jenna held his hand at the door and Ranger sat on the sidewalk and would not leave until the boy waved from inside the classroom. There was a very small Halloween in October where Caleb was a firefighter and Ranger wore a red bandana, and they got so much candy that Marcus ate the leftovers for a month. The adoption paperwork was filed the following March. It was not fast. Court schedules are not fast. But on a bright morning in early June, in a small courtroom in the same building where the custody hearing had happened, Judge Nora Whitaker signed the papers and stamped them, and looked down over her glasses at the boy standing between Jenna and Marcus and said, "Caleb Alvarez, welcome to your family." Caleb, who had asked to keep his mother's last name as a middle name, said, "Yes, ma'am, thank you, ma'am." Then he turned to Ranger, who was sitting beside him in his court-approved therapy vest, and he crouched down and put his forehead against the shepherd's forehead and whispered something to him that nobody else could hear. Ranger's tail thumped 3 times on the courtroom floor. The Fairmont Apartments came down in August. The city had finally scraped together the demolition budget, and on a Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, the yellow tape came down, and the safety fence went up, and a big yellow excavator with the words Harrington Demolition on the side rumbled up Bridge Street. Doug's cousin owned the company. Doug had asked him for one favor. Jenna and Marcus and Caleb stood on the sidewalk across the street, with Ranger sitting at attention on the leash. Caleb was 10 years old now, taller than he had been in September by 2 full inches, with a haircut and a Millbrook miller's cap and a hand resting on the shepherd's head. He was quiet. Jenna did not push. Ranger had picked the exact spot they were standing in. He had led them there and sat down and waited, and Jenna had learned by now not to argue. The excavator began at the east wing, the wing where the fire had been. The wall came down slowly, brick by brick and beam by beam, and each time a piece of the Fairmont fell, a small cloud of dust went up into the morning air and drifted west toward the river. Caleb watched without moving. His hand did not leave Ranger's head. When the last wall of the 3rd floor came down, the wall that had been apartment 307, Caleb finally spoke. He said, "Bye, Mom." He said it very quietly. He said it to the dust. Ranger, without being asked, leaned his big head against Caleb's hip and stayed there. Jenna felt Marcus's hand find hers. They did not say anything. They did not need to. Later that afternoon, when the site was quiet and the excavator was parked and the crew had gone home, Doug Harrington's cousin walked over from his pickup truck, holding something in his hands. He was a big man, with a red face and a soft voice, and he crouched down in front of Caleb and held out what he was carrying. It was a brick. It was one brick from the corner of the third floor, one of the last bricks to come down, cleaned off and wrapped in a piece of blue shopcloth. He said, "Doug said you might want a piece of it, to keep, so you know it was real." Caleb took the brick with both hands. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up and said, "Thank you, sir." He kept the brick on the shelf above his bed for the rest of his growing up. It sat next to the framed photograph of his mother, and later next to his high school diploma, and later still next to the acceptance letter from the veterinary technician program at Penn State. He wanted to work with search dogs. He said so at 11, and he said so at 18, and he did not ever change his mind. Ranger lived to be 13 years old. He was a good dog to the end. He went grey around the muzzle and slow in the hind legs, and he stopped going out on calls when he was 10, and he spent his last 3 years mostly on the rug beside Caleb's bed and on the back porch in the sun. He died on a Sunday afternoon in April, with his head in Caleb's lap and Jenna's hand on his ribs and Marcus sitting on the floor beside them. He did not seem afraid. He seemed like a dog who had done the job he was born for and knew it. They buried him under the maple tree in the backyard, the same tree Caleb had sat under on his first evening in that house, when a 9-year-old boy from a burned-out building had told a woman he barely knew that Ranger said she was okay. Caleb, who was 17 by then, dug the hole himself. He put the shepherd's favorite tennis ball in his paw. He put the blue shopcloth over him. He filled in the grave. He stood there for a long time. Then he said out loud, "Thanks for coming back for me, buddy. I'll come back for the next one, I promise." Somewhere on Bridge Street, on a lot that had once been the Fairmont Apartments, there was now a small pocket park with a bench and 2 young dogwood trees and a bronze plaque set into a stone. The plaque had been paid for by an anonymous donor, but everyone in Millbrook knew who the donor was because Marlene Harrington could not keep a secret from her hairdresser. The plaque read in simple letters, "In memory of Rachel Monroe and in honor of the search dog who would not give up on her boy. This place is for anyone who was ever lost and needed someone to come back. If you have made it this far, thank you for staying with me. Do me one small favor. Tell somebody today that they are not lost to you. Tell somebody today that you are coming back." And if you liked this story, if it moved you even a little, please like this video and leave a comment about the animal in your life who has been that kind of promise for you, and subscribe to the channel so the next story finds you when it is ready.